What if that massive neon-labeled tub of white powder sitting on top of your fridge right now, the one marketed exclusively for bulging biceps, is actually the secret to keeping your brain sharp after a 24-hour sleepless shift?
I mean, it sounds like science fiction, but it's really not.
Right. You probably associate creatine with gym bros, like aggressively shaking their blender bottles in the parking lot to get ready to lift incredibly heavy things.
Yeah.
It has this reputation that is, entirely boxed into the world of sports nutrition.
Completely boxed in. But today, we're really shattering that stereotype. It really is a massive paradigm shift. What we're seeing in the clinical research today pushes this compound so far beyond the weight room that it forces us to reconsider how our bodies manage energy on a systemic level.
Exactly. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you're here with us. Today, our mission is to unpack a truly fascinating article from the publication SpiralSeekr. It's titled The Creatine Hype, Whys and Hows.
And it is quite a read.
It really is. We're going to explore how recent science is looking at creatine for things like neuromuscular aging, cognitive optimization, and even post-viral fatigue syndromes. Okay, let's unpack this because this completely reframes something you can literally buy at any grocery store.
Yeah, what's truly fascinating here is this shift in how we understand the muscle-brain axis, along with cellular bioenergetics. For a long time, we viewed the body's energy systems in these very isolated silos.
Like muscles do muscle things, the brain does brain things.
Precisely. But the emerging consensus from this SpiralSeekr analysis shows that at a cellular level, the energetic demands of lifting a heavy box and the energetic demands of, say, solving a complex puzzle, they actually share a fundamental biochemical currency.
Wow.
Yeah, and creatine sits right at the center of that exchange.
Okay, so to understand the new hype, we first have to establish exactly what creatine is doing at a baseline physical level. Let's start with the bioenergetic engine. What is actually happening inside our cells when we consume this stuff?
Well, to get to the core of this, we need to talk about how your body fundamentally creates and uses energy. When you ingest creatine, it's taken up by your muscle cells and converted into something called phosphocreatine, or PCR.
PCR cut.
Right, and this phosphocreatine is crucial because its primary job is to optimize the resynthesis of ATP.
ATP, adenosine triphosphate.
Exactly.
Think of ATP as like your body's essential rechargeable battery. Every single time a muscle fiber contracts, whether you're sprinting, jumping, or, just blinking your eyes, your body is spending ATP to fuel that movement.
And the key detail there is the word triphosphate. It has 3 phosphate groups. When your muscle needs energy, it breaks off one of those phosphates, releasing a huge burst of cellular energy.
You're leaving behind ADP, right, adenosine diphosphate.
Spot on. Now, it only has 2 phosphates. It's basically an empty battery.
Yeah.
During high-intensity anaerobic exercise, you burn through your existing ATP stores in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
Your body desperately needs to turn that ADP back into ATP to keep moving.
So when you do something really intense, like a heavy deadlift or a full-speed sprint, that battery drains almost instantly. It just plummets to 1%.
It really is.
And creatine is like plugging in an ultra-fast charging cable so the battery replenishes right away. Instead of having to wait for a slow drip of energy to return through normal metabolism, that stored phosphocreatine swoops in.
Yeah, it donates its own phosphate molecule to the empty ADP, and boom, your ATP battery is charged back up, ready for another heavy lift.
That's such a cool mechanism.
Because of that ultra-fast charging capability, the clinical trials show very clear, statistically significant outcomes. We see proven increases in maximum strength, gains in lean body mass, and improvements in lower limb power output.
But it goes deeper than just pushing more weight, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It actively accelerates your recovery from exercise-induced muscle damage.
Because your cells simply have more energetic resources to repair their micro tears rather than just, succumbing to the stress. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you look at the source material, there is a massive pivot away from sports performance. Gerontologists are looking at this and realizing, wait a minute, this ultra-fast charging cable isn't just for 20-something athletes trying to look good on the beach.
No, not at all.
They're applying this bioenergetic rescue to an aging population.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, aging is essentially a progressive crisis of energy decline. As we get older, we naturally lose muscle mass and muscle function.
Which is a condition known as sarcopenia, right?
Yes, sarcopenia. And sarcopenia is what eventually leads to frailty, loss of mobility, and an exponentially higher risk of falls. What the research reveals is that the muscle fibers most affected by aging, the fast-twitch type 2 fibers, are the exact same fibers that rely most heavily on phosphocreatine for their energy.
Oh, wow. So the very fibers that keep an older person from losing their balance are the ones starving for this specific type of energy?
So,
It's literally the difference between being able to easily stand up out of a deep armchair in your 70s versus needing someone to pull you up. It's about functional independence.
it really is about maintaining that independence.
The SpiralSeekr article highlights that combining creatine supplementation with structured resistance training gives those aging cells the energetic capacity to actually respond to the exercise, counteracting that neuromuscular decline.
Yeah, it basically creates a protective biological buffer. You see, mitochondria in older muscle cells become naturally inefficient over time. Their ATP pool just shrinks.
Makes sense.
So by augmenting the intramuscular phosphocreatine stores, you're allowing that aging cell to survive mechanical stress and signal for tissue repair, rather than just breaking down.
So it's not about turning an 80-year-old into a bodybuilder.
No, definitely not. It's about providing the biological energy to maintain the skeletal armor that keeps them independent.
I love that phrase, skeletal armor. But wait, if creatine is essentially an ultra-fast battery charger for energy-hungry tissue, we're kind of missing the elephant in the room here.
Which is?
My muscles get tired, sure, but thinking is exhausting. The brain uses an enormous amount of energy just to keep the lights on. Why isn't this stuff rushing straight to my neural tissue the moment I drink it?
That is the million-dollar question. This raises an important point about resource allocation, because the brain is, well, an absolute energy glutton.
It really is.
It accounts for about 2% of your total body weight, but it consumes roughly 20% of your body's basal energy. Neurons have these incredibly demanding sodium-potassium pumps that require constant ATP just to maintain the resting potential required for a single thought.
20% of the energy, but according to the source piece, the brain only stores about 5% of the body's total creatine. That is a massive supply and demand mismatch.
It's a huge mismatch. Central nervous system homeostasis relies heavily on creatine metabolism to keep those neural ATP batteries charged. Without it, you would experience severe cognitive deficits.
Yikes.
But the brain is highly protected.
So if I'm already taking the standard 3 to 5 grams a day that all the gym goers take, I'm not automatically supercharging my neurons.
The short answer is no.
Yeah.
And that's because the brain has a very robust security system called the blood-brain barrier.
Right.
It's a highly selective, semi-permeable border designed to prevent circulating neurotoxins or pathogens from crossing from your bloodstream into your central nervous system.
People often compare the blood-brain barrier to a bouncer at an exclusive club, right? And usually they say a small dose just isn't enough of a bribe.
That's a fun analogy, but biology doesn't really work via bribes.
Right, the blood-brain barrier doesn't care how nicely you ask.
Exactly. To get creatine into the neural club, it has to pass through a highly specific transporter protein called SLC6A8. And here's the catch. Because the brain synthesizes a tiny bit of its own creatine internally, it actively resists taking in more from the bloodstream.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that structural limitation is key. The brain's internal synthesis makes it incredibly stubborn. Standard physical dosing simply does not saturate the systemic bloodstream enough to force its way through that specific transporter into the neural tissue. The gradient just isn't there.
Hold on, so how do we actually get it past the velvet rope? Because the article mentions cognitive studies using 10 grams a day. 10 grams.
That's a lot.
Anyone who has actually tried to dissolve even 5 grams of this stuff in a glass of water knows it's like drinking sand. Are people really choking down a sandbox every morning just to remember where they left their keys?
It is a significant hurdle, which is why researchers have to get creative. To push creatine through the blood-brain barrier, you essentially have two options. You either have to create such a massive crowd outside the club with a 10-gram megadose that the sheer pressure of the concentration gradient forces it through those SLC6A8 doors over weeks of sustained dosing. Or you hand the molecule a VIP pass.
Ooh, a VIP pass.
Yeah, that's where guanidinoacetic acid, or GAA, comes in. GAA is the direct molecular precursor to creatine, and the blood-brain barrier lets GAA pass much more freely.
Okay, so you send in the precursor to walk right past the bouncer, and then it, transforms into creatine once it's inside the club.
Precisely the mechanism.
Oh.
Once inside the neural environment, the brain utilizes an enzyme and a methyl donor, usually a compound called samethylmethylate the GAA.
Methylate it.
Right. It attaches a methyl group to it, effectively converting it into creatine directly inside the brain.
That is wild.
Whether through the sheer force of high dosing or the VIP access of precursors, This targeted protocol is required to actively force an energetic adaptation, increasing the brain's phosphocreatine content by 5 to 15%.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you, the listener? Now that we know how to get creatine into the brain, what does a 5 to 15% increase in brain energy actually accomplish?
Well, when you look at the meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, the outcomes are intriguing. They show modest but statistically significant improvements in short-term memory, information processing speed, and executive function.
Executive function being like the cognitive control center, right?
Exactly. It's your ability to plan, focus attention, filter out distractions, and juggle multiple tasks. When the brain has a larger pool of phosphocreatine to draw from, it can resynthesize ATP faster during periods of intense cognitive demand.
Meaning it prevents the localized mental fatigue that causes your processing speed to eventually drop during a complex task.
You've got it.
But let's look at a critical detail from the source material here. These cognitive benefits are not uniform. If you are a well-rested, perfectly healthy 25-year-old listening to this, taking 10 grams of creatine a day is not going to turn you into a super genius, is it?
The data is very clear that it won't. For healthy, rested young adults, the cognitive benefits of creatine supplementation are minimal to statistically insignificant.
Really, just insignificant.
Yeah, your neural tissue is already functioning at its energetic ceiling. Giving it more creatine is like trying to fill up a gas tank that's already full. It doesn't make the car drive faster, the fuel just spills over and is excreted.
Okay, so if the tank is full for a healthy kid, we need to look at who is actually running on empty. If the primary dietary source of creatine is skeletal, muscle-like, literally meat and fish, then vegetarians and vegans must have significantly lower baseline levels, right?
They do. Individuals with baseline creatine deficits form the first major group of beneficiaries. Because vegans and vegetarians lack that exogenous dietary supply, their tissue creatine levels are demonstrably lower.
Makes total sense.
So when they utilize a supplementation protocol, they see dramatic, measurable improvements in cognitive testing simply because they are correcting a chronic underlying biological deficit.
That is fascinating. You're filling a tank that was running on half empty. And following that logic, the second group has to be the older adults we talked about earlier.
Yes, exactly.
If their cellular machinery is breaking down in their muscles, the same bioenergetic crisis must be happening in their brains.
It is the exact same principle applied to neural tissue. The aging brain struggles with bioenergetic efficiency. The mitochondria falter. Supplementation helps stabilize that energy network, providing a buffer that improves memory recall and processing speed in gerontological studies.
Which brings us to the third group, and honestly, this is the one I found genuinely mind-blowing.
Oh, the acute stress group.
Yes, it's not about diet and it's not about age, it's about acute cognitive stress. Specifically, people subjected to severe sleep deprivation or hypoxia, which is a state of low oxygen.
Right. Think about what is happening at the cellular level when you are acutely sleep deprived. The brain's ATP levels are just in free fall. You're cognitively redlining. Oxidative stress accumulates because the brain hasn't had the downtime to clear out metabolic waste.
And the source mentions preliminary mechanistic data indicating that in these highly stressed states, the extra creatine steps in not just as a raw energy provider, but it actively supports mitochondrial stabilization and antioxidant defenses in the brain.
Exactly.
It is literally providing neuroprotection when the system is under attack from exhaustion.
This distinction is crucial. Take a healthy, well-rested person and give them a complex executive function test, and their standard energy supply easily meets the demand.
Right.
But keep that same healthy person awake for 24 hours, and their performance predictably crashes. However, if they have been loading with high-dose creatine, that massive reserve of brain phosphocreatine buffers the precipitous drop in ATP.
Wow.
They maintain their baseline cognitive performance despite the immense physiological stress of sleep deprivation.
That is just incredible. It's literally a biochemical safety net. But, okay, let's take a breath.
Sure.
Because with all this exciting preliminary data about neuroprotection and cognitive optimization, it is extremely easy for consumer trends to massively outpace the actual science.
It happens all the time.
The hype train leaves the station, and suddenly everyone on the internet thinks a scoop of powder is going to cure everything from a bad night's sleep to severe neurological disease. We need to look at the reality check, the epistemic limitations, and of course, the safety profiles.
Right. Enthusiasm in bioenergetics must always be tempered by rigorous clinical validation. We should start with the safety profile because creatine is arguably one of the most thoroughly tested dietary supplements on the planet.
Right, because the old rumor, the one you always hear whispered in the locker room, is that taking it long term is going to destroy your kidneys or wreck your liver.
The clinical literature roundly refutes that. Both short-term and longitudinal studies, spanning years, consistently demonstrate no significant adverse effects on renal or hepatic function in healthy individuals when taken at recommended dosages.
That's great to hear.
The body metabolizes the creatine, uses the energy, and excretes the byproduct creatinine quite efficiently through the kidneys.
So, physically, it is remarkably safe for healthy individuals. But here is the epistemic limitation regarding the brain. Regulatory bodies, specifically the European Food Safety Authority, are stepping in to pump the brakes hard on the broader cognitive hype.
Yes, they are. While the data on sleep deprivation and baseline dietary deficits is statistically significant, we cannot make grand sweeping medical claims for the general public.
Right, we have to be responsible here.
The European Food Safety Authority points out that currently a definitive cause and effect relationship for long-term cognitive enhancement in healthy rested populations is not established.
And more importantly, when we talk about that word neuroprotection, we have to be incredibly careful with how we apply it.
Absolutely. There's a massive leap between mitigating the temporary brain fog of a bad night's sleep and claiming that a supplement protects against devastating progressive neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's or Parkinson's.
Exactly.
Acute fatigue is a temporary ATP drop. Neurodegeneration involves complex mechanisms like misfolded proteins, plaque buildup, and permanent cell death.
It's basically the difference between temporarily jump-starting a car battery and trying to fix an engine that has completely rusted through.
That's a perfect analogy. The current scientific consensus mandates that we need much larger scale, longitudinal randomized controlled trials. We need to study these older populations over decades, not weeks, to confirm any true neuroprotective efficacy against disease.
Because right now, the data just isn't there yet for those claims.
Right. We also need those decades of study to establish what optimal neurological dosing protocols would even look like for long-term disease mitigation, especially considering the difficulties of crossing the blood-brain barrier.
So the science is fascinating, but it is still fundamentally a frontier.
Knowledge is most valuable when understood in its proper context. We have a highly effective bioenergetic tool with specific, proven applications for muscle aging and acute fatigue, alongside a host of theoretical applications that are, well, still under rigorous investigation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just summarize the journey we've just been on. We started in the muscle, looking at how creatine optimizes cellular ATP, serving as that ultra-fast charging cable to power high-intensity exercise.
Right.
And more importantly, we explored how it provides the bioenergetic buffer needed to mitigate age-related muscle loss and keep older populations functionally independent.
Then we explored the complexities of the most energy-hungry organ in the body. We looked at the strict transporter proteins of the blood-brain barrier and how high-dose protocols and GAA precursors can push through those concentration gradients to increase neural energy reserves.
We found out that it won't make a rested 25-year-old any smarter, but it offers incredible, measurable benefits for vegans filling a biological deficit, older adults experiencing cellular decline, and healthy brains under the acute oxidative stress of sleep deprivation.
Which brings us back to the importance of critical thinking. While the muscle-brain axis is a thrilling frontier in human bioenergetics, you have to view supplements through the lens of your specific individual baseline needs.
Like, what does your diet actually look like? What is your age? What are your daily cognitive stress levels?
Exactly. Supplements are targeted tools designed to correct deficits or support specific adaptations. They are never universal magic bullets.
And that leaves you with one final provocative thought to ponder as you go about your day. If we connect all of this, if compounds like creatine are actually proven to functionally mitigate the effects of sleep deprivation on executive function and stabilize the brain's energy grid under extreme stress, what does the future look like?
It's a great question.
Could the future of high-stakes professions like emergency room doctors working 36-hour shifts, or wildland firefighters on the line for days, or even just new parents trying to survive the sheer exhaustion of a baby's first 6 months, could their future involve targeted bioenergetic rescue protocols? Imagine a world where we can safely offset the neurological toll of modern life's unavoidable exhaustions, keeping the cellular battery always fully charged when failure simply isn't an option.